G'day, May 40 here. So J.D. Vance is not dominating the news like Elon Musk and Donald Trump, but that which dominates the news is not necessarily the most important thing. And great op-ed here at the New York Times by Republican pollster Kristen Solstice Anderson, who's also a regular on Mark Halperin's program. And she notes that J.D. Vance playing the long game, right? He was turning heads in Paris this week about American global leadership in AI, taking a forceful argument that we need to do less regulation, and taking the completely opposite perspective from Kamala Harris. He sees AI as an engine of progress, and he talks about tech in an authoritative way. He doesn't sound like a guy who needs his kids to give him the Wi-Fi password. Right? He is completely different from much of the Washington gerontocracy. Right? He is young. He's about 40 years old. He should have a long political future ahead of him. And people like young. People like fresh. And Donald Trump and the Republicans did an amazing job with voters under 30. Right? Just basically played even with the Biden campaign. And some of that may well be because of how well J.D. Vance did. So he started off at the very lowest position possible for a VP candidate. Just was getting swamped in terrible press, largely because of his association with Tucker Carlson. He took on a lot of Tucker Carlson's flame-throwing behavior, flame-throwing words. And Tucker Carlson's a tremendously entertaining speaker, but it's not necessarily what you want in a presidential or a vice presidential candidate. So J.D. Vance is clearly what happens next for Republicans, right? He's able to fuse much of Donald Trump's style and his policy agenda with a sense of the future, and he should be able to create a winning message for Republicans going forward, right? J.D. Vance and Stephen Miller are my two favorite members of the Trump administration, right? And they are both so good on TV. They are both really good when they're being interviewed, right? They are really good in arguments. So Gen Z has grown up in an era of politics as internet knife fighting, as internet blood sports, and J.D. Vance loves going into hostile territory and making content that just catches fire online. So CBS News' Margaret Brennan challenged him over the threat or lack thereof posed by Afghan refugees, to which Vance replied, "I don't really care, Margaret. I don't want that person in my country, and I think most Americans agree with me. So I don't really care, Margaret, right?" This line sparks 1,000 I don't really care, Margaret memes, giving voice to young conservatives' frustration over feeling scolded for their views. He absolutely wiped the floor with Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota in the VP debate. And he gives Republicans a taste of what's possible when the Trumpian perspective is channeled through a messenger with much greater focus than what Donald Trump brings to the table. All right, let's catch up on Jesse Waters.
Welcome to Jesse Waters Prime Time tonight.
He's a super genius that's been with. He's going to hunt you down. He's going to find out what's going on, and that's good for everybody.
Doge keeps dunking on the Democrats.
You get your musty hands off of our money.
We're here today because we have filed charges against the state of New York. We have filed charges against Kathy Hochul. We have filed charges against Letitia James and Mark Schroeder.
Trump's all gas, no brakes.
President Trump is a hero.
I've got to say, I'm a bit frustrated when I hear about how helpless Democrats are.
The machine is in pieces. Plus,
if you think you're afraid of Trump, you should see how afraid of Trump I am.
There's been an urban legend for years in Washington. It's about a cave full of bureaucrats hidden 200 feet underground in Pennsylvania. Inside, over 28,000 file cabinets of manila folders. And there are rumors of ghosts pulling drawers open in the middle of the night. One Obama official called it that crazy cave. People inside never see a ray of sunlight. Employees enter in the dark and leave in the dark. And the mood? Crabby and miserable. There's no kitchen inside. fire hazard. So if you want a meal, a pizza man with a security clearance will deliver a large cheese. One worker quit and took a new job blasting holes in oil and gas wells with explosives, saying one of the 5 worst jobs in the world was a great alternative to being down there. It's called Iron Mountain.
If you are a high compliance or high security need organization, this is the place to be. The Western Pennsylvania facility is a city underground. It has many of the same things that a city would have. It has fire and rescue teams and a store. The 30-foot thick limestone and 200 feet of stone above the facility lead to natural weather protection, and the ambient temperature of 53 degrees helps the facility remain cool. Iron Mountain works with our customers to design the space of their needs. Whether it's what you can see over my shoulder, cage material, or solid steel wall, Faraday enclosures, or coops, Iron Mountain is there to support those customers. Additionally, this facility is very unique. All of the cooling goes back to an underground lake. We pump and transfer the heat from the crawl units that you see beside me back to the lake, and then pump that heat into the water. That lake can sustain 10 megawatts of heat coming from these facilities as it stands today.
This is a retirement cave. When John Smith from the EPA retires, his paperwork is buried in this cave. And it takes anywhere from 2 months to 6 months to get it processed. In Texas, it takes 2 days. The work inside runs at the speed of human fingers and feet, and as slowly now as it did in 1977. There are no state-of-the-art computers. Bureaucrats use ballpoint pens and reams of paper, ream after ream after ream. The Washington Post did a big expose on the retirement cave 10 years ago and called it a sinkhole of bureaucracy. Obama knew about the cave and tried to fix it, but failed. Barry spent millions and just ended up hiring 200 more cave dwellers.
We all know that government is slow. We all know that government can be inefficient. We all know that the bureaucracy can be bloated. We all worked in the White House. We tried to reorganize the government. We tried to find efficiency. It's hard to do.
And honestly, some of this is pretty annoying because it's some of the stuff we should have done.
Right, yeah.
The Washington Post did a whole 6-part series about bloated federal bureaucracy during the Obama years on the cave, the VA, Medicare fraud, Social Security. Even Biden was pro-Doge.
As long as there is waste and fraud in government and serious waste and fraud, people lose confidence in the ability of their government to do their job for them.
Okay, so let's say you've got this intense resentment against someone. Should you repress it? Should you express it? No, you should understand it. So let's say I'm mad at a boss who fired me 5 years ago. And I feel like the dirty was done to me. So you have to understand it. So the first step, why am I mad? All right, it was because I was fired unjustly, unfairly. Okay, that's why I'm mad. Second, I need to understand how this thing affected me. So did it hurt my self-esteem? Yes, it hurt my self-esteem. All right, this is a putative example. Second question, did it affect my social standing and reputation? Yes, it affected my social standing and reputation. It damaged my professional history going forward. Did it hurt my sex life? Yes, I lost confidence. I wasn't able to date. I had economic problems, and my life just got smaller because of this unjust firing. And then did it affect my sex life and my love life? Yes, it affected my sex life and my love life. Did it affect my survival, right? Did it affect my physical, financial survival? Yes, it affected my financial survival. So you have to come to terms with how this person damaged you, right? Did it primarily affect your social standing? So I used to hold a great deal of resentment towards people who damaged my social standing. And so you answer these questions vertically. All right, so the first one is unjust firing 5 years ago. So just write down all of your most intense resentments, at least write down the top 10 or the top 20, and you'll soon notice patterns. So for me, a key pattern was that people who damaged my social standing, my status, who threatened my survival, right? Who did damage to me economically, who damaged my self-esteem, but it was mainly my social status. That's what would get me into a great deal of distress. Right. So you have to understand what was done to you. Then the next thing you need to understand is, what role did I play? Right? Did I play any role? Sometimes we don't play any role in these things, but it's important to understand, what role did I play? So I remember I'd been going to 12-step meetings for about a year. And then I finally bought a program book, and I started working the 12 steps. And it was hard going at first because I'd never really hit bottom, right? I'd had some dark nights. I'd had some dark days. I was getting lost online. I was at times looking at things that I shouldn't look at online. Not illegal stuff, but just looking at too much porn. And so I had bouts of curiosity about porn, and then I'd just burn out after a few days, maybe a few weeks, and I'd move on to a more productive life. Hey, I was a seminal blogger, and I had some dark nights of the soul with my relationships, none of which lasted longer than a year. I noticed this intense fear of abandonment that would spring up, and when I'd love a woman, I'd hang on to her too tightly. I'd essentially make her my meaning and purpose in life, that she was the greatest thing in the universe to me, and I'd obsess about our relationship, and this would always lead to me suffocating her, not literally. And then many of these women would go out and sleep with other people just to get rid of me. And so my love would abandon me, or I'd lose a job, or I'd lose a good friend, or I'd lose a community. And it would always stir up this unresolved lack of attachment stuff from my childhood. And I just feel lost in a big world. Never suicidal, but I'd get weepy and I'd get sad. So at age 44, after about 6 years of therapy, I realized that psychology and religion and yoga and Alexander technique were not enough. I needed more help. There was something pathological in me. There was a rage against authority, against anyone who reminded me of my father or certain frightening persons from my childhood. And I realized I wasn't relating to people and places on their own merits. Rather, I was reacting to what they represented to me. So I began my first 12-step program in May of 2011. And then I finally sat down about a year later working the steps. So step 1 asked that I admit that I was powerless before my tendency to have these emotionally addictive relationships that weren't very healthy. Step 2 asked me to accept that God could restore me to sanity. Okay, sure, fine, I accept that. Step 3 asked me to make a decision to turn my life over to God. This wasn't easy. I found it a bit degrading. But then I did some more study into the third step and realized what the third step really means is that you're just willing to work all 12 steps. That's what turning your life over to God means. So there's not a lot of work in the first 3 steps. Right? There are more affirmations. And so then we get to the 4th step, right? That's where you make what's called a complete and fearless moral inventory. And so you start out by writing a vertical column of everyone and everything that you resent. And you work vertically, right? Who or what you resent, you name them. Then you list why you resented them. Then I'd list it vertically. And then how they threatened me. Did they threaten my self-esteem, my social status, my survival, my love life? Then I wrote about what my role was. So, for example, I resented life for crippling me with chronic fatigue syndrome. This destroyed my 20s. I spent most of my 20s in bed. Never made a full recovery. I never got to finish university. I emerged out of it hobbled. Chronic fatigue syndrome threatened my prestige, my social relationships, my independence. What role did I play in getting chronic fatigue syndrome? Unknowingly maintaining my vegetarian diet and driving myself absurdly hard in the months leading up to the collapse. And then I had to tackle resentments against, say, some people who raised me. And I kept telling myself, hey, I can't blame my parents. But then I'd have all this thinly disguised rage against people who reminded me of people who raised me. And so it did absolutely no good to keep telling myself, you can't blame your parents, 40. I'd always avoid talking about my childhood in therapy because it seemed like a waste of time. As I got older, I realized the past is never really past, right? The past is still present. So to truly work this step, I had to start talking about my childhood in therapy, become clear about how I felt about various decisions made by people, mother and father types, that affected me. And then when I had clarity on how I felt about these people who hurt me when I was a kid, I was able to look more clearly at what they had done that I felt had hurt me. I was able to look at how it had hurt me, right? How it damaged me, made me kind of. I sometimes give off this lost dog or beaten dog vibe. So you just raise your hand and I like flinch, and so I've kind of gone through life with this lost dog, beaten dog vibe, and not good for social status, not good for how I feel about myself, not good for my competence. So I had to understand what had been done to me, exactly how it had damaged me, what role I had played, and then I was able to start to begin the difficult work of letting go of my resentment against these people for not being perfect, and how these early childhood experiences contributed to my enslavement to various spiritual or psychological maladies that crippled my life and then damaged other people's life. So just filling out the vertical column, the first column, just naming all the people and places and institutions that I resented, just filling that out, and I came up with about 50. That helped me, just writing that all out. Then filling out the second column helped me see that it wasn't an entire person or institution or idea that I resented. It was a particular manifestation of that person, that institution, or that idea. So it became clear to me how threats to my health, my social standing, my finances, my love life, how they aroused my fear and resentment. Whenever I'd feel like my survival was at stake, I mean, when I was a kid, I had other bigger kids who would sometimes hold my head underwater, right? I feel like my very life was at stake. So one guy stole tens of thousands of dollars from me, right? He threatened my survival, my social standing, and I was able to see how I had played a significant role in allowing this threat to happen. So I had to become clear about how I'd been damaged, which parts of me had been damaged, which parts of me were the most reactive, and then I had to understand what role I played in this. So there are various acting schools that kicked me out. Right, so that damaged my self-esteem and my social standing. My very survival felt in peril when I lost my social home. I had fewer chances to be successful with women and to land jobs and to build friendships and community. So I would then write out about how my own transgressive behavior in writing had brought on my ejections. And so if I felt like, I didn't fully deserve those ejections, well, then I had to come to an understanding that these other people were acting out of their own spiritual sickness, that just as I have sickness and flaws and spiritual sickness, psychological sickness, moral flaws, right? If I'm able to accept myself being flawed, I have to also be willing to accept other people for being flawed. So I wrote about two of the great loves of my life and how both had treated me with contempt. So that hurt my self-esteem, my sex life, my social standing. One woman repeatedly cheated on me to just drive me out of her life. And I saw how I'd made each woman a decade apart my higher power. I'd hoped that they would rescue me. I was not capable of a healthy relationship, neither were they. We each had our own spiritual sickness or psychological sickness. I played the role of the love addict. She played the role of the love avoidant. I chased her. It was pretty sick. I read about the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So when they kicked my father out of church employment in 1980, I was 14. It destroyed my social life, my romantic life, my social standing. We were now outside of everything that was familiar, the Seventh-day Adventist world, and we were effectively exiled into a diaspora. I played zero role in my dad getting kicked out of Seventh-day Adventist Church ministry. So any mistakes that were made in this inevitable confrontation were attributable to the spiritual sicknesses of others. I resented Christianity, felt like I'd spent way too much of my childhood forced to listen to stupid sermons and to read stupid books of Christian apologetics, so I hated Christianity. When other kids were playing, I had to be reading Christian apologetics and typing up a page of notes every day on these Christian classics. So these assignments separated me from my friends. It robbed life of everything that was fun. It retarded my personal development. I never learned to dance and to be a normal person. When you grow up an Adventist, you kind of grow up a freak. So I grew up in this weird separatist cult. I had to learn to surrender my resentment against this religion, or I'd never get emotionally sober. I had to halt my resentment replay machine. So any flaws in my experience of Christianity were the fault of the spiritual sickness of those who perpetuated them. So I am now an adult. I can choose my own religion. I had many confrontations with teachers and institutions. I often reacted badly to authority because authority reminded me of my father. And so I felt like authority was constantly hurting me, disciplining me, distancing me. The actions of my teachers would damage my standing in the community and my ability to make a living and my ability to graduate with great grades. So what role did I play in this? Huge, right? I was constantly acting out. I was breaking the rules. I was challenging my teachers. I was speaking inappropriately. I had ADHD. So anything that was not my fault or it was due to the spiritual sickness of others, I had to forgive them so that I could forgive myself for my own transgressions. I had many feuds with my fellow writers. Right, some of these feuds damaged my face, my income, my social standing, my health, my sleep, right, my ability to earn a living. What role did I play in these feuds? Right, it varied. Sometimes I was a shoddy journalist. Sometimes I used my blog as a bully pulpit to insult others. I stepped on toes. I was not always 100% honest. Sometimes I was a bit deceitful. I was self-aggrandizing. I was manipulative. I was cruel. I was careless. I would thrust myself forward at other people's expense. I was all about number one, and other people retaliated. So those are some examples of if you have a raging resentment against someone, then you want to get clear about, right, let's say it's Joe, right? You write down column 1, Joe. But it's not the totality of Joe. It's just your one experience of Joe. Then column 2, what did Joe do? Let's say Joe stole $10,000 from you. And so that hurts your survival instincts, plays on your survival instincts. It hurts your financial situation. It may damage your social standing because you have to do all sorts of things to make up for that financial shortfall. It might damage your love life, and it might damage your self-esteem. It's like, oh my God, how could I leave myself so way open that someone would take advantage of me like this? Then the next column is, what did I do wrong in this situation? Maybe you did nothing wrong, but you have to be willing to extend to Joe the same grace that you extend to yourself, because even if you didn't do anything wrong to Joe, I assure you there are many horrible, horrible, horrible things that you have done in your life. And so if you are to come to a place where you can forgive yourself for the horrible things that you've done, then you have to be able to extend the same to other people. And we're going to get Mr. Elliott Blatt to discuss these worthy topics. So I hope to have Elliott on shortly.
Deal with their taxpayers' dollars. And when taxpayers' money is wasted in a fraudulent behavior, it robs the taxpayers not only of their money, but it undercuts the ability to us to serve the people we're elected to serve.
Now Democrats are screaming at DOJ for cleaning up the waste that frustrated them a decade ago.
The Trump-Musk administration want to do is they want to look into your kids' lunch money. They want to take that money and give it out in billionaire tax cuts. It's about helping Elon Musk and Donald Trump be as efficient as possible in robbing our government.
Chairwoman Green literally showed a pic in our oversight congressional hearing, so I thought I'd bring one as well. Now, this, of course, we know is
let's
President
get
Elon Musk.
Blatt
He's
onto the show. Mr. Blatt, what's going on, sir?
Oh, blessings, bro. Thanks. I feel as though you created the show just for me, bro. You know what I'm saying?
Wow, that's an amazing coincidence, bro. God works in mysterious ways.
All right. So, well, first, thanks for convening this august occasion. I want to talk through this because it's been vexing me for a while, you know, and I'm trying to think about this, you know, honestly, forthrightly, and yet night after night, I just keep getting, you know, assailed by these thoughts of resentment and revenge.
Okay, I think everybody can identify with you. I think we've all been there.
Okay. And, you know, and I've always sort of imagined myself as being this person who could be heroically forgive others for their transgressions, right?
Yeah.
And it's like year after year it goes on, and these thoughts, these feelings keep welling up, and it's not, I have like no intellectual control over this.
Yep. I got you. I think we've all been there, bro. Yep.
Okay, so I'm not alone here, right?
No, everyone has this. And you never graduate from it, right? You never become so spiritual. You never become so psychologically wise that you become immune to what you're just describing.
Oh, did you drop? Hello, did I drop?
No, I'm still there. I hear you.
Okay. All right, there's a break. Okay, and so I'm thinking, well, maybe it's just a problem with me. I'm just not letting go enough, you know? And I honestly, I mean this sincerely, I'm trying to let go of all of this stuff. And I figure after all of these years, it would just finally just dissipate, you know? And it just keeps coming back, and especially when I'm under stress. And so, you know, I keep having these ideas of writing these letters that are just, you know, slashing.
Yeah.
You know? And I'm like, well, maybe... I think it was William Blake, you know, the English poet.
Yeah.
And he said, you know, can't quote it exactly, but I had my wrath with my foe. I told it not, and it did grow. And I had my wrath with my friend, and I told it, and it disappeared. You know, there's this school of thought that says that you ought to express this resentment.
Yes,
right?
I know.
And it's well codified in like literature, you know. And then there's the other school of thought that says, like you're articulating, which is to just turn it inward and make it a personal problem upon myself. You know, my resentment is my problem. Right?
Okay, so let's call the person you're obsessing over. Let's call him Joe. So what did Joe do that has caused you this situation?
Well, actually, you know what? To be honest, there's like a handful of Joes. And,
okay, great.
And some of these issues are so petty, it's embarrassing to even...
No, nothing's embarrassing here. This is a safe place.
Okay, so for years, there's group one, right? There's non-family and family. So let's just say the non-family. Because the non-family group, they all have the identical characteristics. So the non-family group, they've all blocked me on Facebook, right?
Okay, so let's just take one person just so that we can really drill. So
right,
think about one person who's blocked you on Facebook.
So there's one person, we
Joe.
had a running dialogue
Yep.
for years.
Yep.
4 years. I mean, 6-7 years, you know? And obviously I'm a bit glib, you know, here and there, but I'd always sort of maintained a very respectful frame and like argued in good faith and expressed my ideas, you know, as forthrightly and but respectfully as possible, right?
Okay, but the person blocked you. So when did they block you? Let's just get bottom line here. When did they block
bottom
you?
line, they blocked me like after Putin invaded Ukraine.
Okay, so this would be someone that you'd been in communication with for how long?
At least 5 years, possibly 6.
Okay, so when they blocked you, did that damage your self-esteem?
Initially not, because it felt like a quote-unquote victory. But the sort of lingering sense of non-closure.
Right, it has damaged your self-esteem. It has.
Yeah, I guess so. If you want to phrase it that way, sure.
Yep. Has it damaged your social standing, your sense of community, even online community? Obviously, it has.
Well, it's damaged my IRL community.
Okay.
You know, but it's sort of also clarified.
You have one fewer friend in the world.
I have one fewer friend, and I have one fewer set of connections, which are larger than that particular friend, right?
Yep.
And it feels like a loss, and it feels like an unjustified loss.
Okay. Let's just go through the list. Has it damaged you financially? The repercussions? No.
Not directly, possibly indirectly.
Okay. What about your love life, sex life? Has it damaged that?
No.
Okay. So out of all the things it's damaged, the most damaging is the loss of a friend. Is it the social loss or the self-esteem loss that has been most painful for you?
It was definitely not fun. I forgot. You blipped out for a second. So the self-esteem I heard. What was the first thing you said?
Was it the social loss, right? You had...
Yeah, the social loss.
The social loss was the most painful.
Yes.
And did other people hear about this, and were you reduced in their eyes?
I don't know. Probably not, but possibly so.
Okay.
But it was definitely a diminishment of my overall social life.
And a diminishment of your sense of your ability to operate your own life in your own best interests. Sense of competency, social competency, because this was a major loss and you steered into it.
Yeah. It's a minor loss. Like, economically speaking, like, 3 dimensions, economic life, it had next to no impact. So I don't...
Okay, so out of all the losses, which was the most painful? Was it the social loss or the self-esteem damage?
Yeah, there's a social loss, and I think, you know what? It was like years and years of spirited dialogue that was sort of part of my life.
Yeah.
It was abruptly.
You invested a great deal in this relationship, and it died on you.
I invested in good faith. That's the key word, bro. I wasn't merely trolling, but I was perceived as trolling, and then, cast out.
So is there any questioning your own social competence here, or is it entirely feeling bereft and the loss of this relationship that you invested in?
I've been scrutinizing my own behavior and trying to see.
Okay, so there's a huge self-esteem loss. I mean, I know you don't like the word self-esteem, but you are scrutinizing your own behavior because this really bothers you, and it really bothers you because it reflects much more.
To linger.
Yeah,
I didn't expect it to linger, but it has lingered.
Yep.
And that makes me think, well, perhaps, there's some. I'm trying to be circumspect. I'm trying to be objective. Obviously, I'm in the picture, therefore it's hard to be objective and circumspect.
Right.
But
Okay. We got.
Like you look. You express yourself pretty forthrightly, and
I offend a lot of people. Yeah, I offend a lot.
You offend a lot of people.
I've had a lot of people will not speak to me anymore. Yeah,
okay.
A lot.
And you have a way of processing this. I didn't expect.
I do, but it's exactly what we're doing now. So how many other people like Joe has there been something similar?
1, 2. I know it's small potatoes, but
okay. So how much time do you spend in your head writing up tickets for your unenforceable rules that they should not have done this? When you're spending time over this, is it you use the word resentment, so you must be spending a lot of time thinking like they should not have treated me this way. They broke the code, right? And you're in your head you're writing up tickets for them for breaking your unenforceable rules. True, false?
Yeah, I do write up these tickets.
Yeah, so you've written up tickets. These people have broken your rules. Okay, so have you done anything as bad as these people? Not even necessarily in this realm, but in other realms. Have you ever done anything as bad? For example, did you drive carelessly so that if the situation might have been different, you might well have, killed people?
Driving-wise, I mean, I have texted while driving. Have I been a saint? No, obviously I've not.
No,
been a
have
saint.
you behaved as badly as these people, even if it's not in this exact area, but in a different area?
Not in the past 10 years, Luke. Not in the past 10 years.
Okay,
Maybe
prior to the past 10 years. What about 20 years ago?
20 years ago, very much possibly, yes.
Okay, so as soon as you realize that you have behaved as badly as these people have, even if it was 30 years ago, then it shouldn't be that hard for you to release the resentment, because you want to be forgiven for your horrible behavior 30 years ago. And so you have to be willing to extend the same grace to these people as you would want other people to extend to you.
Well, yes. So put it this way. Sometimes we hurt one another inadvertently. You know? We're honestly not aware of what we're doing when we're doing it. And then there's times when we intentionally hurt somebody, right?
Yes.
And so I'm very open to the fact that I've inadvertently hurt some other people, right? And they have legitimate resentment toward me, right? And so, but what you're saying is that, like, he without sin has, cast the first stone.
No. It's not without sin. Have you done anything as bad? For example, I almost... I would have collided with a car if they hadn't stopped. Like, they had the right of way, I had a red light, and I drove through that red light at like 70 miles an hour because I was listening to music and I wasn't paying attention. So yeah. I did the action that if the other party hadn't restrained themselves from using the right of way, I may well have killed an entire family. So given how close I was to possibly killing an entire family, that I did all the actions necessary to kill an entire family. Given that I did all the actions necessary to kill an entire family, nobody else has done anything to me as bad as that.
Well, put it this way. And it's a good example, and I'm glad you bring this up. What if you probably scared the shit out of one of this family, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So what if one of those family members were to write you a letter and said, Luke, I hate your guts. You scared the shit out of me. You almost killed us. I hate you. How would you receive that? I
think it would be good for me, but not everyone is that going to work on. So I would only recommend sending such a letter after you have received guidance from wise people. So sometimes you do people a favor. It says in Proverbs, reprove a wise man and he will love you. Never reprove a fool, for he will hate you for it. So yeah, if you can give reproof to someone who's wise that they benefit from, then you should do it.
Okay, so now, all right, so this conversation exists in a world in which I believe I was honest, forthright, truthful. No, I wouldn't say non-trolling, but not viciously trolling. I was
undeserving. You were undeserving of what happened to you.
I was undeserving of what's happened to me, yes. And I can't believe that I can't just let this bullshit go. What's wrong with me, bro?
Well, you are not sober, sir. You're not sober vis-a-vis alcohol, and you are not sober vis-a-vis life and your emotions. So you definitely should not be reproving anyone right now. You should only do that once you get to a place of sobriety, and then after consulting with people who are sober. So what's going on with you is what goes on with everyone. It's just to varying degrees. Like this same thing you're talking about comes up for me. Like there is no solution permanent. There is no final solution for resentment. Like we're all like air traffic controllers, right? We've all got all sorts of grievances that circle around in our heads for days, for weeks, for months, for years. They pop back up after 5 years gone, and they take up precious space in our head. They drain our resources, and having them in our psyche makes us unhappy, makes us less effective in life, and we get stressed. We don't sleep as well. We are not in as good a place with ourselves, let alone with other people. So how do these resentments get here? We take things too personally. we create a grievance story, we write up unenforceable tickets, and then we continue to replay the harm that these people have done us. And what we need to get to is the type of peace where you allow these circling resentments to land, and you let go, and you don't keep replaying the horrible things that they've done to you, because you have some clarity about the horrible things that you've done to other people. And so you recognize that, yeah, these other people were probably sick, twisted, not ideal in their choices, just like you.
Yeah, but okay. I've heard everything you said, and I respect it. And in fact, that's how I've been living for the past whatever number of years, right?
Yep.
I've essentially agreed with you, and I'm just frustrated by the lack of results. Like,
yeah, because there are no results until you process this pain. You can't just forgive. You have to take into account how much damage it's done to you. You have to take into account how it acts on earlier resentments from earlier in your life, and how it makes those pains and resentments like that much more difficult. There is no moving past this until you come to terms with how it's harmed you, right? You don't just go straight to forgiveness. You have to analyze exactly how this has harmed you, how it's made you feel less competent or less happy or whatever.
Okay, so what you're saying is that there's an analysis step that I've failed to...
Yes, a processing step. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
You got to process these. You don't just go to forgiveness.
So me, that's effectively been my Achilles heel, because I would just skip the analysis step.
Yes, and try to go straight to forgiveness. And it does not work. Like, let's say I wound you right now in this conversation. Don't go straight to forgiveness. You have to process why what I said wounded you, and be pissed off about it for a week or 10 days. Like, you get fired or something happens to you, you shouldn't just go straight to forgiveness. You have to take time, days, a week or two, to mourn what you've lost. Right? I lost so much of my life because of my vegetarian diet, because of the vegetarian way I was raised, and then my failure to move on from that. Like, I lost 50 years of high-quality living due to my vegetarian diet. There's no point in me just going, oh, I forgive my Seventh-day Adventist upbringing, no biggie. No. There's such an unbelievable amount of loss that comes with the recognition that my vegetarian diet just destroyed my life for 50 years.
That's an interesting example. But in the end, the final analysis, you're saying that there's really never any point or never any benefit to me, even if it's not like emotionally charged, me expressing my resentment, quote unquote.
Yeah, there might be some benefit, but you're not in a place to make that judgment right now. You'd need to talk to people who are wiser and more emotionally sober than yourself. But no, there absolutely is a time and a place for expressing resentment, but that is a very difficult and challenging thing. And it is not the solution to you feeling bad, right? Unless it's in the immediate moment, right? Someone's stepping on your toe, and you need to tell them, get the fuck off my toe, then you should absolutely express that. Someone's trying to screw you in a business deal, and you should, hey, you're trying to screw me. Like, in the moment when you can resolve something, that is the time. Now, years later, that is much more challenging.
But what if my criticism is accurate and it's honest, right? What if it's not me just venting my spleen, but it's me accurately characterizing our interaction and my grievance, and I hate to say that because
no, it's entirely possible, and with some people it will be. So it depends on the recipient, and it depends on your relationship with them. So I would suggest to you, you are not at a place right now where this is likely to work out well for you, and you're not likely to have clarity on it. In general, yes, there is absolutely a time for giving people reproof, but it's a very tricky matter.
Well, right now, it's because, just to enlarge the scope a bit here, this ongoing argument was derived from politics and so forth.
Yeah.
And now my team's got the upper hand,
Yep.
And so anything I would say would just carry the extra sting of me, and it would feel so good, bro. Just to fucking drive the dagger right in,
right.
You know what I mean? And I'm like quaking, resistance, not doing it. Because I have some sublime sort of subtle intuition that's possibly the wrong thing to do, but maybe, I'm thinking, no, maybe it is the right thing to do, and I can do it,
Yeah, so it rarely works out well given what you have said, but sometimes it does, and sometimes it's salutary. But here's an analogy. Fred Luskin wrote a great book called Forgive for Good, and he has worked with people who survived genocides. He's worked with people in Northern Ireland and people in Africa. He's worked with people all over the world, learning to let go of their resentment against people who tried to murder them, who murdered their friends and family. But he does not work in places where there are ongoing conflicts. If there has not been a political solution, he doesn't go trying to offer forgiveness. Right? Forgiveness comes after there is a political solution. And so you're talking about an ongoing political conflict. This is not this is not really the time and the place to try to offer reproof to a member of the other side or try to seek any personal healing from offering reproof to a member of the other side when there's ongoing war, ongoing culture war, ongoing conflict. Right? I think the odds of anything useful coming out of this are quite low.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I mean, you're speaking from a very, lofty and refined perspective. And I'm just trying to understand why I just have this bloodlust. I really want to just drive.
Yeah, because it's playing on something from your childhood. I don't know what it is. So for me, it's fear of abandonment. Yeah. Like I was moved around a lot of different homes early in my childhood. So anything that brings me back to that fear of abandonment. So getting fired, losing a community, losing a girlfriend, losing a connection, a friend, something that I thought that I had something like home with this person or this community. Any loss of that spins me back into those childhood fears of abandonment, and it just becomes even more intense than I experienced in childhood. So whatever's going on for you in these frustrating times that you've been blocked by these various people after you invested so much in the relationship, the reason that it's bothering you is that it touches on something from your early childhood that's unresolved, right? Yeah. There's a mother, a father, someone abused you in childhood, and this is touching on that.
Yeah, so, and it's really astute of you to pick up on this because this particular issue has sort of had aftershocks, and I've started thinking about, relationships with various members of my family, and how often and how frequently I've held my tongue, because I needed to, stoically absorb the slings and arrows of the complexities of family life,
Yes.
And it's like, so all of those other times that I've held my tongue have now come up, and I've been feeling this urge to just express those things.
Yes.
And it's like, and yet I haven't, I just pretend, I put on a happy face, a brave face, like everything's fine,
Yeah, I presume when you were smaller and more vulnerable, you didn't fight back. You just tried to do the best you could in impossible circumstance. And then when you became an adult, you realize, hey, I can fight back with words. You know, I'll never allow myself to be fucked over like I was when I was a kid.
Yeah, exactly. And so I've basically reimagined or reinterpreted this not fighting back, this holding my tongue, as being heroic and honorable and the right thing to do. Right.
And it probably started out as adaptive when you're doing it at 5 years of age and 6 years of age. But what you did that was adaptive at 5 years of age is probably not as adaptive at 18 or 28 or 38.
No, you're right. And so it's like, and so, I've been thinking about, expressing my various resentments to various family members in the same way. And it's a common theme where, like, the only solution that's acceptable is for me to hold my tongue and nothing else is acceptable.
Right. So let's use it. Let's like, I once had a sponsee who starts telling me how he got into bed with a 13-year-old niece, and I was like, stop, don't tell me that. But when you have something you need to share, but that's a felony or just too embarrassing, like, phrase it in terms of a friend. So let's say your friend Bob, all right? Bob had a painful relationship with his father, his big brother, his mother, an aunt. Like, tell me about Bob and how he was hurt when Bob was a kid.
Okay. Well, this is nothing that severe. So what do you? I'm sorry.
So instead of talking about yourself, just invent details or whatever, but just put it all on Bob. So if anyone tries to say, I heard this embarrassing story, it's like, no, that's my friend Bob, and you can even embroider it. So it's not you.
I'm
and you
happy
got
talking about my own life. I don't need.
Oh, okay. So give me a painful relationship from your childhood. What made it so painful and so that it still fucks you up to this day to some degree?
Okay, so like 10, 15 years ago, my brother was sort of at a career crisis, and he needed to change careers. And I'd offered to, teach him the software trade, and help him get out of his particular job situation, which he hated, And so this was like a 6-week, 2-month situation where I was like, just assiduously tutoring my brother to help him through this, but he wasn't putting in the effort. He just thought it was like this magic thing that would happen because he was a bright guy. And he refused to accept, the fact that he had to put in some hours, You couldn't just cram course 2 months and expect to get like a 6-figure job. You need to put in the effort. And he just thought, he's very mathematically talented. And so he had this sort of, I don't want to say condescending, but very dismissive attitude. And at the end of the day, it wasn't successful. He couldn't do what was necessary, right? And he then somehow managed to turn the situation around to blaming me for the situation because I didn't appropriately set his expectations. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, that sounds like a relationship that happens to you over and over and over and over and over again. You're trying to do the right thing by somebody, and they resent you, and it never works out as you intend, and it ends up with them resenting you and you resenting them, and they are never treating you with due respect considering how much you're extending yourself. So I've kind of heard this story many, many times. So this is like a major theme in your life.
What is the root of this? Because I'm So basically, I've recognized this, and what I've done, I've basically retrenched.
Yes.
I've retrenched into this solipsistic, individualistic, survival crouch that isn't my natural. It doesn't necessarily accord with my personality, but is ultimately the most pragmatic and safe. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so, and I wake up at night trying to comprehend like where I went wrong, and I honestly can't figure it out. Like, it's certainly, so it's like if I retrench into this sort of solipsism, right, that feels like a mistake. And then if I extend myself, that also is a mistake.
Yep.
And it's like, I honestly don't know how to walk this particular tightrope.
Okay, so how's this description? We'd come to feel isolated and uneasy with other people, especially authority figures. Is that you?
I feel uneasy with other people, not necessarily authority figures. Legitimate authority, I do respect. Illegitimate authority, I don't respect.
Okay, how about the next sentence? To protect ourselves, we became people pleasers, even though we lost our own identities in the process.
How do you identify with that?
Okay. We live life... having an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, we preferred to be concerned with others rather than ourselves.
Formerly yes, presently no.
We got guilt feelings when we stood up for ourselves rather than giving in to others.
Repeat it. You dropped out for a second.
We got guilt feelings when we stood up for ourselves rather than giving in to others.
That's more true than I'd like it to be true. Yes.
We became reactors rather than actors, letting others take the initiative.
That's true. I agree. Yes.
We were dependent personalities, terrified of abandonment, willing to do almost anything to hold on to a relationship, to not be abandoned. Yet we kept choosing insecure relationships because they matched our childhood relationships with dysfunctional parents.
That's probably more true than I'm willing to admit.
We learned to keep our feelings down as children and kept them buried as adults. As a result of this, we confused love with pity, tending to love those we could rescue.
That's probably more true. Yes.
We became addicted to excitement in all our affairs, preferring constant upset to workable relationships.
Probably true, yes.
Okay, so that's called The Problem, and it's from Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Parents. So there was no alcohol in my childhood, yet that description of the problem completely matches me and my childhood. My family home that I grew up in had all the characteristics of an alcoholic home, just there was no alcohol. So that's the program, Adult Children of Alcoholics. But the best program for learning to get along with other people is called Anon, and it started off as for the spouses of alcoholics. But it's for, we all have to deal with other people who are just sick to varying degrees. So how do you navigate people who are sick? So here's a questionnaire. Do you seek approval and affirmation?
Yes.
Do you fail to recognize your accomplishments?
I downplay them.
Do you fear criticism?
Yes.
Do you overextend yourself?
Yes.
Have you had problems with your own compulsive behavior?
Yes.
Do you have a need for perfection?
Yes.
Are you uneasy when your life is going smoothly, continually anticipating problems?
Yeah. Yes, only to the extent that I just take the easy times for granted and I want more. So I'll say yes.
Do you feel more alive in the midst of a crisis?
Yes.
Do you still feel responsible for others?
Sometimes.
Do you care for others easily, yet find it difficult to care for yourself?
I feel the two are in balance. I'm open to persuasion on either end.
Do you isolate yourself from other people?
Yes.
Do you respond with fear to angry people?
Probably. More so than I'd like to.
Do you feel that individuals and society are taking advantage of you?
Yes.
Do you have trouble with intimate relationships?
Hello?
Yes. Do you have trouble with intimate relationships?
Yes.
Do you confuse pity with love?
Yes.
Do you attract or seek people who tend to be compulsive and abusive?
Yes.
Do you cling to relationships because you're afraid of being alone?
No.
Do you often mistrust your own feelings and the feelings expressed by others?
Mistrust. Repeat it, please.
Do you often mistrust your own feelings and the feelings expressed by others?
Yes.
Do you find it difficult to identify and express your emotions?
No.
Do you think your parents may have affected you?
Yes.
Okay. So that's from Anon. So that's for, started out literally for the spouses of alcoholics, but now it's just a program for learning to get along with other people.
Yeah. But, okay, here's the problem. I'm just going to be frank with you. And, I don't perceive myself as being dysfunctional. I perceive myself as being on the higher end of the functional scale. Mm-hmm. Now, this may be a delusion, but, I'm pretty introspective. I scrutinize my own thinking, I think, pretty assiduously. Now, which doesn't mean necessarily that I'm not capable of mistakes, but I don't engage in bad behavior, or at least what one would think is bad behavior. I'm polite to everybody. I treat everybody. I feel like I treat everybody, empathically. I just try to imagine myself in their situation, and I try to treat them as I would like to be treated. I don't feel as though I engage in any sort of egoistic, gratuitous, disrespectful behaviors. And this is what vexes me. Because, am I doing this? I'm not aware of it. I feel like I'm a good citizen, bro. Isn't that enough?
Well, do you feel like that there's a better way? Better way for you.
Clear? For me, yes. Well,
yes.
Clearly there must be, because,
yes.
I wouldn't be in shit that I'm in currently,
Yeah. So there's probably a better way. And there's, there are different approaches. And this is, I'm really only talking out of the one that worked for me.
Okay. So I think, 10, 15, 20 minutes ago, there was a mini epiphany, the analysis step. I think that was the key takeaway. Before forgiveness, there needs to be an analytical phase.
Yeah, you have to come to terms with everything that this wound did to you, right? You have to mourn the loss. Right, I had to mourn the years of my life lost due to health problems due to my vegetarian diet. I had to mourn the loss of my life due to ADHD. I had to mourn the loss due to my out-of-control emotional addictions. I had to mourn the loss due to my under-earning. I had to mourn the loss due to my narcissistic tendencies. Right, I had to mourn the loss of friendships, of community, of work opportunities, of educational opportunities, of romantic opportunities. I had of just all those burn bridges with good people who I wanted to stay close to, right? I had to take time to mourn those losses and to understand why, despite doing the best I could, I was compulsively acting in a self-destructive manner.
Yeah, it's the mourning phase. This is what I've not been. Okay. I will contemplate this and hopefully act on it appropriately.
Did you see Good Will Hunting?
I didn't, but believe it or not, I was almost in that movie. Can you believe that?
Wow.
Like, there's a scene in Harvard Square where they're playing chess, and like they were filming that movie, and they blocked us off and they kicked us away. They said, if you're like, we're filming a movie here, and if you're in the background, you can't sue us. They do this kind of thing where they legally cover you. So yeah, I was like in Boston when that was being filmed. So, but no, I never actually saw the movie. If you can believe it.
Okay, you might want to see the movie. It's about someone who doesn't go to university but is brilliant at math and carries a great deal of resentment for some things.
Barneys. They talk. You know what a Barney is?
No.
So, like in Boston, there's so many universities. Like the locals kind of get crowded out, and the locals have a term for all the university students, and they're called Barneys.
Uh-huh.
I saw a clip on YouTube. All right, so I'm going to write this down because it's the morning step, that I've not acknowledged or even contemplated. I just assumed that you could just transcend it, bro. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, so there's a question in the chat. How do you know if you have mourned? So you know if you have mourned because you can talk about the loss without weird things going on, without your voice cracking, without tears coming to your eyes, without tensing and compressing, right? If you can talk about your loss in a normal tone of voice without all sorts of weird things flowing through you, then you've processed it. But until you can talk about the loss without your voice cracking and weird interfering tension patterns flowing through you, right, then you haven't processed it. So very easy test. Can you talk about it normally without tension and without stress?
All right, but this mourning process does not involve me expressing myself to these various people that I feel like...
I don't believe so.
Interesting. Okay. All right, bro. You've given me ample to think about. I really appreciate it.
Yep.
I'm going to think about it and act accordingly.
Okay, bro. Good to talk to you.
All right. Peace. All right. Thanks.
Okay,
right,
peace out. Okay.
Right.
So, I got into 12-step work in 2011. So, this is some journaling that I did in 2012. So, I began 12-step work in May approximately of 2011, but I didn't begin seriously working the steps until July of 2012. And so step one, I admitted that my life had become unmanageable. So this took me many years to admit. I was not usually thrilled with my life. It never occurred to me to go to 12-step because I thought that 12-step programs were for the weak. And I was not weak, right? I felt like I did nothing that I could not control. I believed I was the master of my destiny. And early on in my life, I developed all these bottom-line behaviors that I would avoid, right? I did not call them bottom-line behaviors. I'd never heard of that term, but I knew that these things were bad for me. So many of my classmates at primary school at Avondale College in Australia were into buggering each other and animals. And I was eager to explore sex, but I decided early on, no sodomy, no buggery, no bestiality. I mean, that's just the kind of high moral standards that I have. So I grew up a little, and then I decided I would not wait until marriage to have sex, but I would always behave ethically, right? No married women, no cheating, nobody underage, nothing illegal, and I stuck to that. And looking back, I can see I was just managing my addictions. So most of my life, I have felt a need for God, but most intensely when my life was going poorly and I wasn't connected to others. And when I descended into the morass of chronic fatigue syndrome at age 22, I knew that I would just destroy myself if left to my own devices. So I needed not just God, but I needed some organization, some system, some religion. Let me convert to Judaism. But then my demons remained. They weren't even tamed. I just took my addictions into the synagogue, and after hundreds and thousands of hours studying Torah and studying Talmud, my demons were untamed, right? I found out I'd converted to Judaism, and now I was chasing shiksas, right? Then the internet came along, and all the things that I fantasized about, I could now find video of them online. I knew I needed to do something about this problem of mine, because so powerfully did I want to, explore sex and porn. So I decided to write about the porn industry, investigate it, and thereby try to inoculate myself from its charms. And this felt like it largely worked, but it left me socially isolated and unfit to marry any decent girl. And then I stopped writing on porn in 2007, and my porn demons then returned stronger than ever. Right? In 2009, I had what I regarded as my best relationship ever, but it didn't last beyond a year. She broke out with me 5 times in that year. That time was just filled with me idealizing somebody who wasn't there, blaming her for failing to live up to my projections. I was just obsessed about her and dependent on her. And in the end, I didn't feel like I was man enough for her, because almost nothing else in my life was going very well at this time. So when nothing else in my life is going well, then I have often put way too much weight on my romantic and sexual relationships. So I came to 12-step by accident. My defenses were down. I decided to stop intellectualizing about it and just try it on pragmatic grounds. I didn't worry about buying into the program. I thought, I'll just try the program. And as soon as I did, I felt better. Right? Going to meetings helps you feel better, but only working the steps helps you to get better. So I noticed from my first meetings that even the nature of my sexual fantasies became more tame. Then as I moved through my initial sex addiction program, I noticed that my addictions kept shifting. I noticed that when I felt empty and I wasn't turning to porn anymore, I'd just tune into Facebook to try to say something shocking and get a hit of connection. I'd make a provocative status update on Facebook to get some attention. I'd felt most alive when I was looking at porn. Now I wasn't looking at porn, so I tried to feel alive from posting provocative things on Facebook. So I was stuck in 2 types of romantic relationships. One type with pathetic, irresponsible girls who were very loving, and the other type with high-achieving women who had great deal of contempt for me. So if your life is unmanageable, you very likely have some sort of addiction going on. So step 3, I accept that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. So I remember I was an atheist from about age 18 to 22, and during that time I had bosses in landscaping who were Pentecostal Christians. They thought I acted like a good Christian. They couldn't understand my atheism. I said, I want to be able to do what I want to do, and I want to subordinate myself to God. I've always been in rebellion against being told what to do. But after I fell into chronic fatigue syndrome, I realized my own inclinations will destroy me. I have to accept the dictates of some organized religion. God is the only ends you can pursue without limiting yourself. And I noticed that most religious people around me didn't have the problems that I did. I'd see this in movies and TVs and novels. When characters did not have some overarching purpose, they were highly likely to destroy themselves pursuing their own desires. I know many great people in Orthodox Judaism. I see what a God-centered, disciplined life can achieve. Much of who I am and what I do has been shaped by my addictions, and much of the time didn't even know it. So I need to keep returning to authentic human connection. Psychotherapy helps, but my life was just constantly working at cross purposes. There was porn versus Torah. There was religion versus sexual promiscuity. I was just constantly just at war with myself. So one of my favorite teachers is this bloke, Fred Luskin.
Other path is, wow, I have to change myself. That's the fork in the road. Many of us get hurt and can't figure out what to do. That in and of itself is not a problem. It can take a while to get unhurt and unstuck. That in and of itself is not a problem. The problem is when the hurt doesn't resolve and you overlay that with some bitterness. Like, I've been hurt, there's nothing I can do about it, the world is not a safe place, and therefore bitterness becomes part of one's statement on life. And that's when it becomes toxic, and that's when it gets encrusted into family stories, or into tribal stories, or into group narratives, and it's really deadly stuff, because those of us who haven't forgiven, even though we may not recognize its harm, at some level, if we haven't forgiven, we believe that the world owes us something. Because, and I'll put this as bluntly as I can, if you feel that the world has been fair to you throughout your life, you will let go. So if somebody is really nasty to you, but you remember, well, my parents took care of me when I was helpless, and they had an education system that taught me stuff, and there's people all around making food and like buying stuff, so I just have to walk in to the supermarket and hand them a card. If you pay attention to your life's blessings, you will want a stasis. You will want a level playing field. Those of us who are gratitude challenged, so to speak, or unable to find enough good, those are the ones who hold on. Because you're not actually doing a check of whether a person or thing should be forgiven. You're doing an entire life algorithm of whether you've gotten enough to be gracious. That's an ugly truth that people do not want to hear. And that is it's why when people don't forgive, there's something like not off, but they have a tendency to want to pay it forward. But they export their nastiness in small ways. And they use it, and this is the real danger, they use it to excuse their bad behavior. That's the damage that unforgiveness does to this world. It's okay if I mistreat you because you mistreated me. And we hold that always in those of us who have not forgiven. It gives us an excuse to be unkind. So I remember when I was studying in this stuff, and I saw couples, I saw all sorts of people, but I saw couples, and like, I have to tell you, the modest number of times I've done couples therapy, it's astonishing to me how hostile people can be in front of a stranger. I have to tell you, there was something so bizarre. You get two people to sit in a room. Somewhere along the way, they pledged to do their absolute best with somebody. But you have to think about that. They made a vow before God and other people, I'm going to bring my A game to this person. Then they show up, and within like 30 seconds, they're screaming at each other and calling each other idiots. So there's something about a grievance that shuts down a part of the brain that serves a regulatory function in your mind. It stops calming you and stops giving you balance. Once you've decided that blame is the answer, not me reforming myself. That's the junction. Blame is the answer. It's their fault. I'm not entirely responsible for what happened to me. Or, wait a second. I've been struggling with dealing with my ex now for 10 years. That's enough. 10 years. I tried. I failed. So let me figure out something else. Those are the alternatives in terms of whether you hold on or you let go. The problem either resolves in our making of it or what was done to us. Those don't blend very easily. So it's either we have failed to solve one of life's issues confronting us, or life has failed in terms of protecting us and giving me what I want. I've done this for too long to see it anything.
So when you have resentments, you can't help but also have body armoring, additional layers of tension and compression, and learning to let go of that tension and compression can help you.
Hello, this is Robert Rickover.
So this is Robert Rickover.
Again, to talk about your work. Could you say a word or two to our listeners about exactly what the Alexander technique is, or give them some idea of it?
In a nutshell, the Alexander technique is a unique body-mind practice for improved performance in all of our activities and for comprehensive physical and emotional stress management calming and balancing of our nervous system and healing of many issues such as chronic pain, anxiety, and repetitive stress injuries.
Mm-hmm. And I think most people, when they think of the Alexander technique, most people who have some knowledge of it associate it with performers learning how to do whatever they do better, or people who are in pain of one kind or another, typically back pain, shoulder or neck pain. Those are the kind of areas where the Alexander technique is sort of best known. But your particular specialty is working with recovery and relapse prevention. And I think the first question our listeners might have is, what does the Alexander technique have to do with that?
Well, I have to answer that question by talking about my personal journey with recovery and relapse prevention. And I will keep it brief, but many people get into becoming addicts and alcoholics because of chronic pain, typically, or anxiety or other issues that they are self-medicating. In my case, when I was in junior high school, I was in a very severe diving accident in a swimming pool where I almost broke my neck and back. And as the years progressed from that accident at age 13, I developed chronic neck and back pain in certain vertebrae that were affected in discs, and over the years became addicted to pain pills, and also had serious problems with anxiety and became addicted to tranquilizers. You can't take any of this kind of medication for more than about a month without becoming, at the very least, psychologically dependent on it, if not physically as well. And that began to shape my life, dealing with the chronic pain and then the dealing with needing increasing supplies of these medications took over, which is, again, very, very common. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes a double-edged sword that you have to deal with the pain. You can't really stop the pills unless you have stopped the pain. And my life was a round robin of doctors, and I started seeking alternative measures such as acupuncture almost 25 years ago, and sought some relief with those measures. But basically, it was the Alexander technique that finally enabled me to become free of the pain, to avoid surgery. And this was not a slam dunk, like it just happened in a year of lessons. It was a pretty long process. But because, at a certain point a person becomes, I was going to Alcoholics Anonymous. I also became an alcoholic, which is also very common with people who take prescription drugs. I was going to AA. I was at times able to stop drinking, but because I was always still taking these pills, which work in the brain in many of the same ways, they hit the same receptors in the brain as alcohol, tranquilizers do in particular, you will start drinking again. There's no way you can stay clean and sober. So chronic relapse became my life. And what happens with the Alexander technique is that it improves as we learn to stop our automatic pilot reactions in movements we do in life that are harming us, that as we learn to use our body in a more coordinated ways, as we restore poise to our functioning, which is, the word poise actually means balanced equilibrium. Mm-hmm. If we restore that fundamental nervous system and bone and tendon and muscular poise that we had when we were ancient hunter-gatherers, these lean, mean, fighting upright machines that we were millions of years ago, when we restore that kind of coordination, our whole body changes, including our brain, and we get more balanced, and what happens is we calm down comprehensively, and so we can handle all kinds of stress better, and stress is the reason people cannot stay clean and sober once they take away their drug of choice. And this sounds like I'm saying the most basic, simple-minded thing in the world, but people who become addicts and alcoholics typically have a chronically engaged level of stress similar to post-traumatic stress disorder. In other words, from a neuroendocrine standpoint, their hormones and their nervous system are staying in basically an exaggerated frozen place of chronic engagement with stress in a way that unless you fundamentally give people the tools to calm themselves down, then they will relapse. Mm-hmm. And my life, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to jump in here to just because I think it might help to clarify a little bit about how something like the Alexander technique, which is really about learning how to stop doing patterns that are harmful. And that is something that's pretty unique about the Alexander technique. We're not really generally interested in telling you to do different things than you have been doing. We're more concerned about showing you or helping you to notice for yourself what you're doing that is not helpful. And of course, everything is both mental and physical, but it's maybe easier to understand by saying certain things that you're doing physically that you could label stress, but it could also be labeled muscle contraction. That's what you learn how to identify, and then what the Alexander technique teaching process shows you how to do for yourself is how to stop doing those things. Now, as you said, it's not a quick fix because the habits of producing those tensions can be pretty strong. But I would think from what you're saying and how you're describing your own process, your own history, and just in general, that without you being able to prevent that kind of stress from building up on a physical level, it does seem like the underlying issues that would drive someone to alcohol or drugs or whatever aren't going to go away. And so somehow you have to get at the root of the problem, which is all this excess, at least on one level, physical tension that you're creating in yourself.
Well, that's exactly right. And the technique, as you just said, it teaches us, well, first of all, it teaches us to develop awareness of our whole self. Mm-hmm. And then, when we're aware of what we're doing, whether it's putting, lots of G-forces through our legs as we walk, or having a death grip. I call it in lessons the death grip on the Titanic, where people are holding on for dear life with their feet to the floor, and you realize, why am I holding on to the floor like this? I don't need this energy to help myself just stand here or sit here. We develop that mindful awareness of our where we're holding tension, as well as doing things like clenching our teeth, clenching our hands, or repetitive patterns. And then we learn, as you just said, how to stop and then change are these automatic habitual reactions and patterns of movement. And that, in terms of an exact corollary for recovery, when you stop engaging, recovery from addiction is to begin to put together one day at a time, 1 minute at a time. You don't pick up. You don't ingest the substance again. But in terms of calming yourself and changing habits, you also stop and become aware of, again, for 1 minute at a time, of what you're doing, of whether you're nervous, of whether you want to, go call a friend who's not maybe the best friend anymore for you to hang out with. You learn a mindfulness about how you're living, that you stop, and in those intervals, and this is a separate issue, but not really, the physical process of doing that, which is the absolute unique thing about the Alexander technique, the physical process of being mindful and then stopping, in that interval of stopping and pausing, which they call inhibition in the technique, that interval creates enormous choice for us to make different choices and to learn how to redirect our behavior into new, healthier ways of living. And
yes, and can I just interrupt?
You can
with
jump in any time.
All right. You, in the bio information you sent me, you included a quote which I don't remember reading before, but it's perfect for this. You're quoting a man named Dr. Wilfred Barlow, who was a very famous Alexander Technique teacher. He's also a physician in London. He died a number of years ago, but in his book he writes, Alexander's work is concerned with the moment-to-moment management of our perceptions of ourselves. And that is exactly what you're talking about, that any change that you make in yourself can only be made in that split second of the change. You can't change tomorrow. You can't change yesterday. You can't even change a second earlier or a second later. It really is just now. And I wonder, I know that phrase you used that I've heard often, one day at a time. Mm-hmm. I wonder if really a more accurate phrase might be 1 millisecond at a time.
Absolutely, Robert. And that's the thing, the reason this is such a message of hopefulness, to have a physically based process for people to get recovery. And I will want to hope that we'll have a minute to talk about what I've observed in some of the classes I teach at treatment programs. But it is stunning that, recovery is built. Recovery is a cognitive and physically based behavioral change process, meaning, again, a person often in the beginning, when you take away someone's way they've self-medicated, whatever it is, whether it's, street drugs or prescription drugs or alcohol, there is a time period when people are doing what is called white-knuckling it. And they are, the cravings can be horrible and they can be very, very intense. And getting through that period of time to have physical tools that can help someone literally calm themselves. And the technique, again, offers that. And then a mindfulness-based process helping you learn how to be in your own skin, in your own body, and tolerate, literally, as you just said, from one moment to the next, as Dr. Barlow said, moment to moment. That is the key. And you put together enough of those moments and you create a day. And then you create another day. And all of these hackneyed cliches, I've been going to Alcoholics Anonymous on and off for 20 years, and at times they are just the most nauseating cliches that you think, oh gosh, this is just, I can't hear this again. Mm-hmm. And then one day you turn a corner and you understand that these simple phrases like that are lifesavers and that they are so meaningful. And if you can somehow get through that glass ceiling of somehow your nervous system over time, if you can put together enough of these moment-to-moment little changes, you then build sobriety and you build clean time. And one day your nervous system really is rewired and you don't have the cravings anymore. And the technique is a powerful, innovative tool for jump-starting that and giving people immediate calming, immediate ability to handle cravings better.
And it's immediate calming that you create for yourself once you've learned some of the basic ideas of the technique. And I would think that's an incredibly empowering thing, because it really says, okay, you're actually in charge of yourself now. And that can be demonstrated on a physical level at will. That's a pretty amazing thing about the Alexander technique, I think.
I completely agree.
Yeah. Why don't we conclude by you said you wanted to talk a bit about some experiences that you've observed in classes that you've taught. I think that might be a nice kind of final thing to talk about.
It would. I'd like to add one more thing about post-traumatic stress disorder, because addiction and post-traumatic stress disorder, as we all know from the media and from these different military people coming back with post-traumatic stress disorder and many ramifications, these are both areas, that is, addiction and post-traumatic stress disorder, that are of epidemic proportions, especially in the U.S. And as a tool to build mindfulness, I have to say this, Robert. In the world addressing addiction and PTSD, one of the newest basis for treatment is a mindfulness-based program. And one of the reasons I'm calling what I'm doing mindfulness-based Alexander Technique is to play off these other programs as a complement to what they do, that is more from a mental standpoint only, that gets people somewhat in touch with their body, because that is what mindfulness programs do. However, the technique is a quantum leap that expands upon a practice like that, because it gives people these in-the-body means to immediately calm themselves. And my journey included not only recovery from addiction to pills and alcohol. I got into those because of the chronic pain and because of the post-traumatic stress disorder that developed in my life from some things that happened to me. And it was almost a surprise, Robert, when I woke up about a year ago and realized, oh my gosh, I'm not jumping at every sound. I'm not jumping at some of the sudden movements.
Right, that was one of the first things that people noticed about me when I was taking Alexander Technique lessons. I was much less jumpy. I was much more smooth. I was much more coordinated, much more graceful, much less compulsive. So before I studied the Alexander Technique, I used to tip back, right? So you see here I'm interviewing the actress Charlie Chase, and I'm just like tipping back from the waist and compressing my lower back. So this is one of the most viewed Alexander Technique lessons on the internet. Diana Devitt Dawson.
Hello, Gita. I'm Diana. Would like to introduce some Alexander principles to you. So would you show me how you would just sit down and stand up? Just in your way. All right. And then standing up. And are you at the computer quite a lot?
Yes.
For
8 hours a day.
8 hours a day, okay. And you're studying
law.
Okay, then and it's full on for you.
That's right.
Not much reflection on perhaps how you're sitting at the computer, just getting in and doing it, perhaps getting what you have to do done.
That's correct.
All right. Just stand in front of the chair again. Where the Alexander re-education or pointers, or the Alexander Technique as a lesson is referred to, it can help you pay attention to you during the act of whatever it is you're doing. Sitting at a computer, going for a swim, riding your bike, you are conscious of a particular area that brings into balance the whole organism. And it really is the head-neck-back relationship, so that sort of simplifies it, if you like. And the little guiding orders are, let the neck be free of unnecessary tension, that's understood, to let the head balance up on the neck's not leaning forward, so that the spine can lengthen during the act of whatever you are doing, and the shoulders can soften and widen out. Softening, widening out, across the whole torso, widens. Now I'd like you to just sit down again, as you did, and then if you stand up again. So, in light of what I just was talking about then, the head-neck-back relationship was very much jeopardized. Our head weighs about 4.5 kilos. That's a lot. Sitting on a little neck. And we would rather it not go back and down when you sit down, because it just puts the spiral and the compression, I should say, rather than the spiral, all the way down your back. It also, for women, interferes with our pelvic balance, and to not least of all, the feet. Our feet are not going to be grounded if the head is kept throwing back and disturbing the pelvic balance. Now, I'm going to guide you into the chair this way with those principles so you can think about them during the act of actually using them, if you like. So you'll be doing the thinking and I'll be doing the moving of you, just in a general act of sitting down. We do it all day long.
So there was a professor at University of California at Berkeley, Galen Cranz, who wrote a terrific book, The Chair, Rethinking Culture, Body, and Design. So it's all about the history of the chair, because sitting in chairs probably does more to deform people's use of themselves than any other single thing. So you see people before they go to school, right, they tend to have good use of themselves, but then once they start sitting in chairs, right, they start becoming contorted.
You do not slump to meditate. Anybody know of a slumping meditation? I don't think so. So I think probably if they viewed themselves as antenna, they were upright because they had that job of connecting to higher forces. It's not that they're artists couldn't depict flowing ease. If you've ever been to Egypt, you've seen fish carved into the stone that look as if they're alive. They're so subtle and fluid looking. So it's not a question of skill, which I've read some furniture history people will say that. So it's not about that. It's about different ideas about what you're trying to accomplish. And here it's domestic.
So a question in the chat, what do I think of mindfulness? So I'm sure it helps some people, hurts some people. I remember having under owners who just wanted to spend the entire day in prayer and meditation rather than meet their responsibilities. So some people have psychotic breaks when they try to practice mindfulness. So it's been an absolute disaster for some people. Other people have benefited somewhat. Not much evidence that overall it has a positive effect.
This is a domestic scene, the klezmos. The Romans brought us another piece of furniture, which is could be as simple as a pallet or as elaborate as this bed. And this is how they conducted their social life. They kept the klezmos and the throne, but they didn't use them very often. Most social life was conducted lying down or lift steps. Here's a 13th century real throne, just to show you that these things still exist. Furniture historians try to account for the reemergence of the chair, and they say there are several sources. The king is one, and then there are these storage boxes that were lining the halls of. It's pretty hard to sing seated as you are, right? How many here sing? Show of hands. How many singers? How many non-singers? Non-singers have it. Can the singer tell us, can you sing seated like this? Not really. Not really. Why?
Well, because you just have nowhere for sort of your diaphragm to...
So, you see, I have a pretty jaundiced view of the recent history of chair design. Where did I get this view? Well, it's sort of the fault of the Alexander technique. I was training in the 80s, and I came to England to visit a friend. I had been an exchange student in England at the University of Kiel my junior year abroad. And I was visiting friends whom I'd met from that time period, and one of them had gone to Africa to teach English, and she was showing me these snapshots of the people with whom she had been teaching. And I was looking at them, I think the end of my first year of Alexander training, so I was looking at them with my new Alexander eyes and looking at the relationship between the head and the neck and looking for who's forward and down and who's jammed and who's this. And I thought, they're like us. There's a variation. Some are in better shape than others, blah, blah, blah. And then there was a guy who stood out from all the others. Wow, great, great. great carriage. Head leading but not pulling the neck forward in a gooseneck. Arms not forward in clerical stoop, nor pinned back at military excess, just falling right and evenly down over a beautiful and deep chest. Magnificent. There was one other like him. And I said, ooh, another, blah, blah, blah. And my friend says, that's funny. She didn't know about I had just become interested in chairs. I had run my first seminar on chairs at Berkeley, looking at them from an ergonomic point of view, a style history, a social history, a knockdown and manufacturing point of view. We looked at everything that we could. And I felt I came to understand what was going on, except the ergonomic literature had so many internal contradictions. Seat height, some said the lower you go, the better, and some said the higher. The issue of the back, should there be lumbar, how much, where? Even arms, some people said it's not worth putting arms because only 4% of weight is transferred down. So I was kind of muddled. What are they, what's the deal here? And she didn't know anything about that I was bringing, this confusion that I was bringing. So, and she said very casually, that's funny, the two you have picked out are two that grew up in a village with no missionary schools. So they never sat in tables and chairs. I heard trumpets, or drum roll or something. It was the birth of the hypothesis. Oh, it's not good chair design or bad chair design. There's something wrong with chairs, period. And I have to find out what it is. So a photograph doesn't prove anything, but it did give me a hypothesis that took me back to the medical rehabilitation literature and the ergonomic literature with a new lens, and I started keeping track of all the problems caused by chairs. And finally I came to realize that the problem is the right angle seated posture. It's the right angle so the musculature behind the thigh that comes around and wraps and goes into the back of your pelvis, that gets pulled, and so it pulls the pelvis backwards like this, rounds it this way, and then that flattens the lumbar curve, and you get into this horrible slump. That's why these guys are right when they're starting to talk about getting the pelvis right. But it's hard to get the pelvis right unless you're an Alexander person and you spend a zillion years, or a yoga person spending a long time learning to get this pelvis free and separated so it isn't just locked into one sort of fused relationship to the spine or to the leg. So for most of us, this right angle flattens the pelvis, rotates it back, flattens this curve. Now, look at, this is my friend, the one who's gone to Africa. This is her daughter at the time, and notice here this nice elongated spine and how the leg and the arm are free. They're free to go forward without pulling the rest of the spine with, because she's not yet frozen into one. Her joints are still supple. So she can keep her back and bring her leg forward. Same here. And her face can go with all of our perceptual stuff, is all right here. So she can go forward without pulling down like this. So this is to suggest, this is to remind me to say that we all have what Alexander people call perfect use. That is, we don't like to use the word posture because it might imply something too fixed. Also, there's a psychological component of posture. The word attitude, which now is sort of a psychological term, originally had to do with the position of the body in space. So physical and mental are closely linked. So we use the word use of the self to refer to posture. We all had good use until at least a year and a half. And then we lose it at differential rates depending on the culture we're in, what are the seating practices and other postural practices, the family that we're in, what are the psychodynamics of shame and fear and love and whatever, and our own individual personalities. Not everybody loses it. Some people keep it all their lives and become the great athletes, like, Michael Jordan or Muhammad Ali, or the great pianists, or the great Fred Astaire dancers, etc. Some people keep it, but most of us lose it, and I submit that the chair has a whole lot to do with our losing it. Now, the science behind what I'm saying, I've hinted at already, that this set of muscles comes around here and flattens this. Standing, we have a double set of curves. Now, think about this structurally. If you put a heavy weight on a C or a heavy weight on an S, which is stronger? The S, right? Shumik, am I right? Yes. The S is stronger than the C? You're going to collapse this one pretty easily, right? So when our spine turns into a C wound, our big old head takes us down pretty easily. But guess what? When we're in this halfway between sitting and standing, the perch position, that's why they named their company Perch. The perch position allows us to keep the double S of the spine, even as we rest our legs. So it's got the best of both worlds and the disadvantages of neither. So we want this position. And in outer space, when we float around without any gravitational force, what do? What is neutral for the human body? It's this position. This is neutral. This is where the musculature on front and back are balanced. They call this neutral body posture in NASA, National Aeronautic Space Administration. And here, just to show you, they really do float around like that in outer space. An American surgeon did some research on what happens to the lumbar spine in different postures, and guess what? Lying on your side is really good. A, up there. Squatting isn't so bad. The only thing worse than sitting, this one, is sitting with your feet up. You can round this even further backwards, or you can round it further backwards by bending, like doing that. So sitting is really bad news from the point of view of the health of the lumbar spine. Why do we care about this? Because slip discs, you heard about slip discs, right? Slip discs happen because you overly open this, you round this, you press here, and the disc bulges out this way. So sitting is bad news. This is the base of the AT&T building in New York City, and they had this very funny old-fashioned furniture here for a while, and I just happened to snap this person sitting in this chair, and here's what's going on. The designer knows about that forward slide that we started out with at the very beginning. Remember, when you lean back, you tip, slide forward. So they raised the front of the seat up by about about this much, half an inch. But it's not enough to stop his forward slide. So he noticed it crosses his leg. That helps create a stronger force here and keep him from sliding forward. So he's not, the body is not dumb. He's trying to take care of himself. Now, the design, we also know that when you go to 90 degrees is tough, and if you tip up the front, you're getting less than 90 degrees. It's getting even worse for your lumbar. So the typical design person then says, okay, so we'll open the back this way. Now, it turns out that it's a world of difference between, this is bad. You can open the 90 degrees this way, or you can open the 90 degrees this way. And there's a world of difference between doing it this way and doing it this way. This one is vastly superior. But let's look at what happens to this poor guy. So the designer thinks he's helping him out by going off 90 and opening it this way. So spine going back. I need the pointer. This I can reach. Difference between this is bad. You can open the 90 degrees this way, or you can open the 90 degrees this way. And there's a world of difference between doing it this way and doing it his head forward. But let's see what happens to his spine. Here's his spine. And then about here, it takes a big bump forward. So he's building in to his spine over many years of use a terrible thoracic hump. He'll have a widower's hump, and then people will say, you have to get old somehow. But it isn't age. It isn't age. It's cultural practice, sitting in chairs, that is producing these deformities.
Okay, that's Galen Cranz. She published a terrific book. She's a professor at the School of Architecture at University of California, Berkeley. And her book is The Chair, Rethinking Culture, Body, and Design. It's a history of the chair. All right, I'll talk to you blokes later. Bye-bye.